Today. A lot of it can be found in my documentary films, which you can buy right over here. Lost Secrets of Ancient America, Volume 1 and Volume 2. Volume 1 is almost 4 hours long, and Volume 2 is a little over 2 hours long. And Volume 1 was released last year, and Volume 2 has been out about a month and a half. And we've traveled thousands of miles for these films. I want to give you a little bit of a background on me and how I got involved in all this. I first started researching conspiracies and government crimes and all this stuff back in the early 1990s. In 2004, I was reading a book by Jim Marrs called Rule by Secrecy. And in this book, there was mention at the end of a chapter, it said, maybe one day we'll have answers to all these questions that we seek about this, that, and the other, etc. And maybe we'll have answers about the strange and mysterious wall in Rockwall, Texas. Now, immediately for me, that sent off red flags because I grew up in an area not too far from Rockwall, Texas, and my whole life grew up having strange experiences around this area, from UFO sightings, missing time events, just very, very strange phenomena. So when I read the words in this book about some ancient wall in Rockwall, Texas, I immediately said, oh my gosh, this is it. Kind of just sent off flags for me. So I started, at that moment, when I found out about it, I said, I'm going to do everything I can to uncover this and bring this out. And here I am 10 years later, and we're finally starting to make some headway on this. And there's been several attempts to try and, let's say, downplay or dissuade people from looking into the real truth. If you've never heard of what the rock wall is, it's an ancient wall. It's 20 miles in diameter. It's buried about it goes down something close to 7 stories, about 100 feet down to the bedrock underneath the town of Rockwall, Texas. And what's interesting about this wall is it's not so much a rock wall as it is a crystalline wall. And it's made up primarily of zircon and garnet. But it also contains not only zircon and garnet, but tourmaline, starlight, rutile, titanite, brookite, several rare earth metals. Niobium is one of the ones that's included in this wall as well, which we use. We didn't even really learn how to use niobium until the late 18th century. And here it is in this wall. We use it to reinforce pipelines, jet engines, rocket engines. And it's used as a structural engineering material, and that's one of the things that's most interesting about this rock wall, is just how many structural engineering feats have gone into making this thing, especially something this old. Now, there's many estimates on how old the rock wall is. The best estimates that we have, based on the analysis and everything we've seen, put it at about 220,000 years, somewhere in the neighborhood of there. It also produces piezoelectrical energy. Because of the makeup of the wall, it's leveled 550 feet above sea level. It has buttressing built in, so you can put heavy objects on top of this thing for sustained periods of time without it buckling. And there has been, most recently, there was the attempt by the History Channel in their show America Unearthed to try to quote-unquote put out the truth of this. But long story short, I talk about this a lot more in the films, but the main thing they left out, they claimed it was a natural formation, but they really didn't bring all the evidence to the table to support that idea. They did a little scratch test on a rock that wasn't even from the site, it was just a rock on someone's property. They didn't bring in the material makeup of the wall at all, and that's the most important thing, because their whole analysis was based on the fact that the paleomagnetic data on the rock wall gave it a uniform signature. Of course, if it was a man-made signature, they claim it's supposed to be random. Well, what they didn't do was they didn't give people any of the information about what this wall was made up of. Primarily, the quartz crystal polymer that is used between the stones to keep the stones together. If you want to see a little example of what the rock wall looks like, on the front of my DVD over there, you can see pictures of it. But between the stones, there is a mortar substance where the stones are perfectly buttered with a trowel like a stonemason would do. And this geopolymer substance, when it was analyzed, was found to contain 3 different types of quartz crystals brought from multiple locations. And It's super airtight, it's resilient to water, and it's built to withstand the test of time. Now, any quartz contained in any object that you may be doing paleomagnetic data on is always going to show that it is a uniform signature, indicating that it would be natural because of the quartz makeup. This was not mentioned in the show. I detail more and more in the documentary about the attempts to try and downplay this. Now, why would they attempt to downplay this wall? Why would they want people to believe this wall is natural? Well, for a variety of reasons. The cover-up goes back to this, really to the late 1800s in Rockwall. There were various news reports, which I document in the films as well, of giant skeletons being found in proximity to this thing. So I really just started my investigation from the standpoint of, okay, well, let's look and see if there's anything else around the United States that's ever been found like this. And if there is, and we found the same type of stuff that we see in Rockwall around here, then we'll know we're on to something. And that, of course, led me to looking into things like mounds. There are many strange elevation changes around the Rockwall area where there shouldn't be. Of course, the giant skeletons again. So I just started looking around and seeing if there was any of this stuff ever found in the United States before. And to my surprise, there's been mass amounts of this. So this led me on a trip to try and discover the things that are found not only with Rockwall, but throughout the United States. We've gone now to over 20 states. We've documented dozens and dozens of sites from Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, the Serpent Mound in Ohio, the Newark Earthworks. And many people have no idea that America is so vastly rich in ancient mysteries and ancient sites. We're kind of led to believe, I think, that India and Egypt and all those places are where you want to go explore, and we don't really believe America is that interesting, but it actually is. I mean, we have a pyramid here in the United States that's bigger in its footprint than the Great Pyramid at Giza and the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan. And that's Cahokia in Illinois, which we have some replica artifacts over here that came from there. This is a civilization that came up literally overnight and disappeared almost as quickly. And we start to see throughout the United States, when you go to various ancient sites, up until about 800 AD, there was really no building. And across America, between about 800 and 1500 AD, you had an explosion of ancient sites, earthworks, all across the United States at the very same time. Now, certainly the Rockwall is much older than these sites, but the reason the correlation is important is because we see things in the Rockwall, even though it's much older, that we see in these more recent megalithic buildings, such as alignments to the solstices, to the equinoxes, things like the alignment to the Cygnus star system and the Denham portal. We see lots of connections with that. And that was really what led me to start to look more into, okay, there's got to be something to this. So I started looking at a lot of the research and stuff that people had already found on the wall. And one of the things that was very interesting to me is when the soil analysis was done with the Rockwall, it was found to have been covered in a catastrophic event that happened somewhere between 12 and 16,000 years ago. Now this catastrophic event is what's known throughout many cultures as the Great Flood, or almost every culture in the world has a flood story. And the soil evidence at Rockwall shows that this thing was compacted during that event, meaning it was uncovered up until about 12,000 to 16,000 years ago, and then something catastrophic happened that caused all this overburden and soil to be pushed on top of it, and it remains buried under Rockwall to this day. My purpose is trying to get my own independent dig going so that we can verify a lot of the things that have been found in past research but never really documented and put into a film. Things like the piezoelectrical energy that I mentioned that the Rockwall produces. In the late 1990s, there was a dig that was conducted, and some gentlemen put a digger on top of the wall, and the low-frequency oscillations from the motor of the digger caused the entire wall to start shaking and vibrating, and they said that this tractor was appearing like it was going to take off and shoot like a rocket because it was just building up energy. So this thing was definitely built to resonate energy, produce energy. It produces electrical current. There are copper rings that have been found in the wall that almost appear like some sort of ancient, wall plug for power. It's unbelievable. But one of the things that we've really been struck by are these, what we call boreholes. And we see these strange holes that appear to be bored in some of the stones. We see this at Rockwall. It's where I first saw it. And then I started to see it pop up, and we've seen it now pop up everywhere, on almost every site we've gone to. And there are these strange holes that are not done by modern instruments. In some of the cases, like Chaco Canyon where we see this, there has never been any sort of artificial digging or anything into these stones, but there are these strange boreholes where some device, some ancient tool that's beyond us, was bored into these rocks for some purpose, again, that we just don't know about. Well, we've seen this at Rockwall, we've seen this at Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, we've seen this in places like Colorado, the Grand Canyon, all over, anywhere, especially the Four Corners region of Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. All four of those, that area is actually in antiquity was one gigantic area that stretched hundreds and hundreds of miles away. And this is also where you see many of the strange petroglyphs and whatnot that depict some sort of entities coming down. And there seems to have been an event that happened that really caused a great upheaval in this country, and with the indigenous populations being enslaved and forced to build these structures. But I really don't have a lot of time to talk about all this stuff, so I'm kind of hitting the highlights. That's why the first film is almost 4 hours long, and the new one's a little over 2 hours long. So we have about 6 hours worth of material, and so if you're interested in this stuff, you can definitely look into it further. But I think a lot of times people speculate about who they think these people were. In my work, we get into right into naming who it is and who it may have been, because we see evidence of ancient Paleo, Canaanite, Hebrew languages being found all over the United States. Ancient texts like the Back Creek Stone, the Los Lunes Decalogue Stone. We see languages that predate Hebrew languages and appear to be Canaanite, Phoenician in origin, and we see that iconography spread all over the United States, even in the names of our cities, like Phoenix, which is on the 33rd degree parallel. The Rockwall is also on the 33rd degree parallel. Many of these ancient sites were built on this, but in the films, again, I don't beat around the bush. I get right into naming who these people are, where they came from, and really what their purpose was. And so, give me a minute here. There's been, through the years, several attempts to try and analyze this wall, but no one's really ever been able to make any headway with it. The Smithsonian Institution in 1927 has been a big group of interest that's come up a lot in my research. Every time we seem to try to locate an artifact that's been found, we find out, okay, the Smithsonian has it. Then when we go to the Smithsonian to try to get pictures of it, they say, oh, we don't have that anymore, it's lost. We don't know where it is. In case in point, there was a stone that was found in Rockwall. It's a 2.5-ton garnet stone that has hieroglyphs on it that have never been found anywhere else in the world. And this stone is now in the possession of a well-known congressman from Texas, Congressman Ralph Hall. And the reason why this stone, I think, is so guarded is because it's the only example of any writing that's been found around the rock wall, and because it hasn't been identified with anything else, it's considered very important. Well, there was actually a coin, a strange coin that was found some years ago in a well in Illinois. And this coin, on one side, has a strange, almost like a Statue of Liberty type person with a crown, holding a staff, and on the reverse side of it, it has these hieroglyphs that match this Sanders stone, this 2.5-ton garnet stone found at Rockwall, identically. This stone was found in a soil strata in this well in Illinois that dates to exactly 220,000 years. Now that puts it right at the same target date as the information we have on the Rockwall. Now, if you follow mainstream science and you believe what they tell you, there's really not anybody that could have been building or doing anything that far back. But when you look into ancient texts, like ancient Sumerian texts and ancient writing from the ancient Middle East, we see things like the Sumerian king list. Now the Sumerian king list is a small tablet, it's about that big. There are replicas out there you can buy. But definitely look into this Sumerian king list on your own because it's very interesting. It was actually in possession of J.P. Morgan the banker for a period of time. Now that I know what this thing is, I understand why he would have wanted it. It essentially details a 432,000-year cycle, pre-flood cycle, of cities on Earth being constructed by these ancient gods that the ancient texts refer to as the Anunnaki. And the dates that it talks about when the cities, 12 great pre-flood cities being erected all around the Earth, the dates that it gives for when these were being constructed was somewhere between 200 to 240,000 years ago. So this puts the rock wall right in that target date for this being built, because this thing is just a massive complex. I mean, it's 20 miles in diameter, total length. It goes down about 7 stories down to the bedrock. There has been numerous shark's teeth, sand dollars that have been pulled out of the bottom of this thing that are not petrified, that have fresh meat in them. So you really see the evidence when you dig down that this thing was compacted in a catastrophic event somewhere around 13 to 16,000 years ago. There's many that believe that this could possibly be what was referred to as an Atlantean city. And it's very interesting because with the rock wall being located right on the 33rd degree parallel, the ancient texts describe after the flood, when civilizations first started to rise up again, they rose up in what is now the ancient Middle East and what is now Iraq, in what became Sumeria, Babylon at that time. That's also located smack dab on the 33rd degree parallel. So it's very interesting that we would see these pre-flood cities exist along the 33rd degree parallel, and then immediately see after that, start to see them rise back up again. And again, I talk about this more and more in the new documentary film, as well as Volume 1. Let's see what else we have here. As I mentioned, the rock wall stone is very interesting because it's one of the heaviest and hardest stones. We have a couple of examples of it back there. You have to break through layers of this blue shale to get to where the actual rock wall is. But the rock wall makeup, again, it's zircon and garnet are the two most primary minerals found. Zircon, garnet, starlight, tourmaline, rutile, titanite, brookite. Titanite and brookite are very interesting because those are minerals that we mix together to make alloys. Titanium, any of the rest of that. And I immediately said, okay, well, if these stones, because these stones are cast stones, these were actually made together from a composite material, and it would be almost impossible today, it would be virtually impossible for us to take all of those different types of minerals and mix them together and make a cast stone out of it, because many of these minerals, such as tourmaline, which I have for sale over here at my table, are rare and actually worth a lot of money. And you see the amounts it would have taken to take and cast all these stones and to make it would just have been a feat that's beyond us. And I actually had a geologist who looked at the makeup of the wall that said that it was not possible for those minerals to have been put together and put in stone in Earth's current atmosphere, which I just thought was a very strange comment. The reason that is because unlike any other material that we would mix together, say concrete or anything else, the molecular structure of the individual materials in the rock wall do not bond. These elements remain independent in situ in the stone, meaning the tourmaline stays independent. They don't blend together at all. That's a process that is beyond us. Again, how someone was able to level this entire 20-mile diameter structure at exactly uniform 550 feet above sea level across the board. It's something that we don't know, as well as the alignments of the solstices, the equinoxes, and again, that's something that I've looked at these ancient sites across the United States, from Moundville in Alabama to the Serpent Mound in Ohio to Cahokia to the Chaco Canyon, New Mexico. All of these sites around the United States all share these same common alignments. And in many cases, like the Serpent Mound in Ohio, it shares some similarities with the rock wall. It's built on top of a massive deposit of a rare earth metal called iridium, which we use to create battery-powered sources for long-distance space probes. The Serpent Mound in Ohio is built upon a giant cache of this stuff, and it also produces a piezoelectrical energy, just like the rock wall is. So again, these are things that I was looking at saying, okay, if there's a precedent for this, in other places in the United States, there's got to be something to it. So I started trying to find where would be the best possible place you would mine the type of materials that are found in the rock wall. Lo and behold, I found a spot that's about 2 hours south of here, near a town called Llano, Texas, in an area near Lake Buchanan. The Llano Uplift is what they call this. And in this area, it's one of the most, if not the most, geologically rich area in the United States. Back in the early 20th century, there was a big boom by people like Charles Westinghouse and Thomas Edison to come to Llano, Texas, to a place called Barringer Hill to mine some of the elements, the rare elements found there, like gadolinite and others, to make filaments for light bulbs. Supposedly the uranium from the Fat Man and Little Boy atomic experiments was mined here, and they subsequently covered this up and built the lake on top of it. Now that's another common thing that I come across so much that blew my mind are man-made lakes being built to cover up ancient archaeological sites. Now this happens, again, at Lake Buchanan. It happened at Rockwall. Much of Lake Ray Hubbard and Rockwall was built to cover up part of the rock wall. I found this in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. There we had ancient sites that were flooded out and covered up, ancient mound sites, sacred sites. On and on and on. There are so many cases of this. We document some of those in the film. But when you start to see 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 10, 15 cases of something, then you start to realize, okay, this can't be a coincidence. There's actually a systematic cover-up here. And I most recently had found out that there's a gentleman, one of my listeners, who has some property down near where Llano is, who actually found, I haven't gone out to investigate it yet, but he's actually found what we believe to be another rock wall type structure near Llano that has the same geopolymer mortar substances. And so I started to hone in on this area as being the most prime candidate for the material mining that the rock wall is made out of. And lo and behold, I find that the two most prominent minerals in the Llano Uplift are zircon and garnet, just as the two most primary elements we find in the rock wall itself are zircon and garnet. Tourmaline, all of this stuff is there. We have this, actually I heard they have it over at the Creationist Museum, which I just think is hilarious. But there was this item I heard about that's found down in Llano. It's called the Orco-Davidian hammer. And somebody said, oh, you ought to look into this. This probably ties into what you're looking for. It's found down there in Llano. I said, oh, okay, cool. And I go and look, and lo and behold, it's this hammer, a man-made hammer that's encased in like this, millions-of-year-old rock. And I'm thinking, where do I find this at? And it's at the Creationist Museum. And I'm just thinking, that's the last place I would have thought to look for that at. But anyway, it is very interesting. But the Earth being 8,000 years old, I think there's just way too much evidence to prove otherwise. Not to step on anybody's toes religiously or anything, but I think dinosaurs pretty much disproved the 8,000-year-old thing. But anyway, we are now currently traveling to other sites around the United States. We're trying to put together more evidence. We've now put together quite the story of these ancient people, engineers, advanced technology, advanced engineering skills. The Ohio Valley especially, where you see hundreds and hundreds of sites that are all, again, aligned not only to solstice and equinox events, but also aligned to lunar events, some of which take place over decades and decades of time, 20, 30 years, at a place like Chaco Canyon with these massive structures. Someone would have to have lived out there in this very remote area for 20 to 30 years prior to any of the structures being built there, just to be able to encode into the architecture of the buildings these events that happen over 20, 30-year timescales sometimes. So if you're at some of these sites, at some of these events, the sun will, or the moon in some cases, will strike these buildings and cause light to shine through at an exact perfect angle, depending on what time of year you're there, marking these solar and lunar events that happen over slow timescales. We also start to see things like some of the materials being brought in from hundreds and hundreds of miles away, the structures taking hundreds of years to be built. This is something that really has perplexed me more than anything else, is the idea that we have ancient sites on the East Coast, central part of the United States, and on the West Coast that all were built over hundreds of years of time, and then right when they were completed, all the people that built these structures and inhabited them disappeared without a trace. Moundville in Alabama, we see that. Chaco Canyon, New Mexico, same story. On and on and on across the United States as I've traveled, I found more and more of these sites that all have the same things. And somebody like the Smithsonian Institute will tell you that, cultures on the opposite sides of the Mississippi River from each other couldn't have had contact with each other at all. But yet, when you go out to these places yourself, like I have, you see that to be absolutely not the case. You see similarities between cultures, between sites, especially the eye and the hand motif that you see in a place like Mountville, Alabama, then you see it out in New Mexico. Now that pretty much smashes this idea that the Smithsonian Institution has put out that cultures on the opposite sides of the Mississippi River couldn't have had anything to do with each other, when you start to see the same iconography, the same religious practices. In Mountville, Alabama, you had a practice and a religious belief that mirrors the religious practices of the Egyptians that are found in the Egyptian Book of the Dead and also in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and the idea of what the soul goes through after death in the afterlife. And in some of the sites, such as the Newark Earthworks in Ohio, this story and this idea of what the soul goes through after death is actually encoded into the buildings and the structures themselves. So that when people came to these sites thousands of years ago, they would actually externally experience this on the way to the journey. And again, the Newark Earthworks in Ohio, you have this massive structure that kind of looks like the Starship Enterprise. It's very strange. And it's aligned perfectly to the Great Pyramid at Giza. You can draw a straight line on a map from the back of the Newark Earthworks in Ohio, straight across the globe all the way to the Pyramid of Giza. Now this became something where I started to realize that, okay, these sites, I may be covering the lost secrets of ancient America, but the people who built these sites had a very, very, very distinct knowledge of ancient sites that are all across the world. So I've started to name who these people might have been. Again, we'll talk about that more in the movie. And really getting into the evidence of who these people were and why they were here. And it definitely does appear that the founders of this country knew full well what was here and what happened here in the olden times. If you look at Sir Francis Bacon's book, The New Atlantis, he describes the New Atlantis being built on the ground of the old Atlantis, and how there would be skyscrapers, flying machines, and everything we have in our modern society. Sir Francis Bacon predicted in his book, The New Atlantis, and predicted this would be where the New Atlantis would be built on the ashes of the old. And he actually came to America very, very early on in the colonial days and set up what we now know as the secret society or fraternal brotherhood network, such as the Freemasons, in this country. He set it up in universities through the Rosicrucians and brought the Rosicrucians in first. And this was what it was all about. It was about keeping this knowledge of the true history of ancient America, the true history of our past, a secret from the modern day people, so that this country could be used for the devices of a world power structure. And I think very much we're seeing that happen to this day. But again, there's just so much to get into in this talk, and not a lot of time to do it here. Definitely check out my films. You can also watch us online. theglobalreality.com is my website. If you want to get more information on my work, just type Josh Reeves into a search engine, and there it is. So I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you so much, everybody, for your time. Have a good day here at Texas Weird Fest, and come see us over the table. Thank you very much. That sent off red flags because I grew up in an area not too far from Rockwall, Texas, and my whole life grew up having strange experiences around this area, from UFO sightings, missing time events, just very, very strange phenomena. So when I read the words in this book about some ancient wall in Rockwall, Texas, I immediately said, oh my gosh, this is it. Kind of just sent off flags for me. So I started, at that moment, when I found out about it, I said, I'm going to do everything I can to uncover this and bring this out. And here I am 10 years later, and we're finally starting to make some headway on this. And there's been several attempts to try and let's say, downplay or dissuade people from looking into the real truth. If you've never heard of what the rock wall is, it's an ancient wall. It's 20 miles in diameter. It's buried about it goes down something close to 7 stories, about 100 feet down to the uniform signature. Of course, if it was a man-made signature, they claim it's supposed to be random. Well, what they didn't do was they didn't give people any of the information about what this wall was made up of. Primarily, the quartz crystal polymer that is used between the stones to keep the stones together. If you want to see a little example of what the rock wall looks like on the front of my DVD over there, you can see pictures of it. But between the stones, there is a mortar substance where the stones are perfectly buttered with a trowel like a stonemason would do. And this geopolymer substance, when it was analyzed, was found to contain 3 different types of quartz crystals brought from multiple locations. And it's super airtight, it's resilient to water, and it's built to withstand the test of time. Now, any quartz contained in any object that you may be doing paleomagnetic data on is always going to show the bedrock underneath the town of Rockwall, Texas. And what's interesting about this wall is it's not so much a rock wall as it is a crystalline wall. And it's made up primarily of zircon and garnet. But it also contains not only zircon and garnet, but tourmaline, starlite, rutile, titanite, brookite, several rare earth metals. Niobium is one of the ones that's included in this wall as well, which we use. We didn't even really learn how to use niobium until the late 18th century. And here it is in this wall. We use it to reinforce pipelines, jet engines, rocket engines, and it's used as a structural engineering material. And that's one of the things that's most interesting about this rock wall is just how many structural engineering feats have gone into making this thing, especially something this old. Now, there's many estimates on how old the rock wall is. The best estimates that we have based on the analysis and everything we've seen put it at about 220,000 years, somewhere in the neighborhood of there. It also produces piezoelectrical energy because of the makeup of the wall. It's leveled 550 feet above sea level. It has buttressing built in, so you can put heavy objects on top of this thing for sustained periods of time without it buckling. And there has been, most recently, there was the attempt by the History Channel in their show America Unearthed to try to quote-unquote, put out the truth of this. But long story short, I talk about this a lot more in the films, but the main thing they left out, they claimed it was a natural formation, but they really didn't bring all the evidence to the table to support that idea. They did a little scratch test on a rock that wasn't even from the site, it was just a rock on someone's property. They didn't bring in the material makeup of the wall at all, and that's the most important thing, because their whole analysis was based on the fact that the paleomagnetic data on the rock wall gave it a today. A lot of it can be found in my documentary films, which you can buy right over here. Lost Secrets of Ancient America, Volume 1 and Volume 2. Volume 1 is almost 4 hours long, and Volume 2 is a little over 2 hours long. And Volume 1 was released last year, and Volume 2 has been out about a month and a half. And we've traveled thousands of miles for these films. I want to give you a little bit of a background on me and how I got involved in all this. I first started researching conspiracies and government crimes and all this stuff back in the early 1990s. In 2004, I was reading a book by Jim Marrs called Rule by Secrecy. And in this book, there was mention at the end of a chapter, it said, maybe one day we'll have answers to all these questions that we seek about this, that, and the other, etc. And maybe we'll have answers about the strange and mysterious wall in Rockwall, Texas. Now, immediately for me,